Hello friends. Before listening to the story of an old racist policeman attacking Keanu Reeves in court, turning pale when he found out his real identity, please help the Heroic Hacks Story 5 channel to grow by liking, positive comment, and subscribing. Hopefully those who support Chanel will become the best human beings. Let's continue with the story. Racist old cop attacks Keanu Reeves in court, turns pale when he finds out his real identity. The courtroom was filled with tension. Officer Harold McGinty, a retired cop with over 40 years on the force, sat at the defendant's table, arms crossed, scowling. His grizzled face, lined with arrogance, barely concealed his annoyance at having to be there. Across from him sat a man in a black suit, long dark hair tied back, his expression calm but unreadable. He had yet to speak, but the entire courtroom was drawn to his presence. The judge cleared her throat. "We will now hear from the plaintiff. Mr. Reeves, please step forward." McGinty scoffed, rolling his eyes. "This ought to be good." Keanu stood up, adjusting his suit before walking toward the stand. His movements were smooth, effortless, like a man who had nothing to prove. But the moment he turned to face McGinty, a strange flicker of recognition crossed the old cop's face. He squinted, tilting his head slightly. The prosecutor began. "Officer McGinty, do you deny attacking Mr. Reeves outside the courthouse last week?" McGinty snorted. "I don't even know this guy." Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "That's not true." McGinty chuckled. "Oh yeah? Then why don't you tell everyone what really happened?" Keanu folded his hands. "I was walking outside the courthouse when you approached me. You told me to get lost and called me a—" He paused for a moment before continuing. "Street rat. I told you I was there for a meeting, and you got aggressive. You grabbed my arm, shoved me against a car, and told me people like me didn't belong in places like this." Murmurs filled the courtroom. McGinty smirked. "Sounds like something I'd say to a troublemaker." The prosecutor lifted a remote and pressed play on the courtroom screen. Security footage appeared, grainy but clear enough. It showed McGinty shoving Keanu with unnecessary force, jabbing a finger in his face, his mouth moving aggressively. The audio wasn't available, but the intent was crystal clear. McGinty's smirk faded. The prosecutor turned to him. "Still don't remember?" McGinty's eyes flicked back to Keanu, and the realization hit him like a brick wall. His face went pale. His hands twitched slightly on the table. Keanu met his gaze with an unreadable expression. "Do you recognize me now?" McGinty swallowed hard. You're... Keanu nodded. "Keanu Reeves." The courtroom erupted. Reporters whispered furiously. The judge banged her gavel for silence. McGinty's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The prosecutor leaned in. "So let me get this straight. You saw one of the most famous actors in the world, a well-known philanthropist, and assumed he was a criminal, that he didn't belong in a courthouse?" McGinty shrank in his seat. His career had been built on profiling, intimidation, and unchecked authority, but now, sitting in front of the entire world, he was exposed for what he truly was. The judge sighed. "Officer McGinty, based on the evidence, I find you guilty of assault and racial profiling. Sentencing will follow." Keanu stood up and buttoned his jacket. He gave McGinty one last look before walking out of the courtroom. Cameras flashed, reporters yelled his name, but he ignored them. Because this wasn't just about him, it was about every person who had been silenced. And today, for once, the silence had been broken. As Officer Gerald Tate was led away in handcuffs, his mind spiraled. This couldn't be happening. He was a decorated cop, a man who had walked the beat longer than most of these people had been alive. But now, with cameras flashing and reporters shouting, he felt exposed in a way he never had before. Keanu watched him without a word. His expression was unreadable, but there was no satisfaction in his eyes, no gloating, just a quiet, steady presence. That unnerved Tate more than anything. The prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, given the new evidence linking Officer Tate to the disappearance of Samuel Reeves' case files, we request an immediate federal investigation into his past conduct." The judge nodded firmly. "Request granted. Officer Tate will remain in custody pending further inquiries." Tate's knees nearly buckled. He turned toward Keanu, his voice shaking. "You don't understand. Your father, he was digging too deep. He was asking questions that weren't supposed to be asked." Keanu finally spoke, his voice measured. "And you made sure those questions were never answered." Tate swallowed hard. His world was crumbling. His allies, the system that had protected him for decades, were nowhere to be found. His power was gone. Keanu stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough that only Tate could hear. "You spent your life trying to keep people like me out, but justice doesn't care about your rules, and neither do I." For the first time in his life, Tate felt truly powerless. Keanu didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out of the courtroom, past the flashing cameras and murmuring crowd, disappearing into the city. Justice had finally caught up, and for Gerald Tate, there was no escaping it now.